She helped a stranger in a snowstorm, unaware he was a vampire king with a life-changing gift. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's tale. The winter storm had hit hard. Snowflakes swirled violently through the air, blanketing the city in a thick, white silence. The streets were empty, the world quieted under the weight of the storm. People stayed inside, keeping warm, avoiding the cold. But not Julia. She was used to long hours, to walking through rain and snow to deliver goods. Tonight, she was running late, carrying a basket of bread for the local bakery, her only source of income. The storm was ruthless, the wind howling against her face, biting through her thin coat. She hurried along the narrow street, her shoes sinking in the snow with every step. She had to make the delivery before the bakery closed. As she approached the alley near the bakery, she saw him. A man, slumped against the wall, looking as if he could barely stand. His dark hair was damp, clinging to his forehead, his face pale, almost ghostly in the dim light. Julia's heart skipped a beat. She was no stranger to helping people in need, but this man, with his odd, almost inhuman beauty, made her hesitate for just a moment. His eyes, when they flickered open, glowed faintly, like embers burning in the dark. He was clearly freezing, his clothes soaked through, his body trembling with cold. Without thinking, Julia approached him. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. The man looked up at her, his eyes locking onto hers, a strange, knowing look in his gaze. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, his lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I'm fine," he said, his voice low and smooth, like velvet. But Julia could see the struggle in his posture. His body was giving way to exhaustion, and it was clear that he couldn't go much longer in the cold. "You're not fine," Julia said, her words leaving no room for argument. She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his arm to steady him. "You need help." The man didn't argue. He just allowed her to help him to his feet. Julia guided him into the warmth of the bakery, where the owner was just finishing up for the night. She didn't have much time to waste, but she couldn't leave him outside. The bakery's heat hit them like a wave, and the man visibly relaxed as he stepped inside. He sank into one of the chairs by the counter, his eyes closed for a moment. Julia quickly wrapped him in a blanket she found nearby, her mind racing with questions. Who was he? Why was he out in the storm alone, looking like he'd been through something much worse than the weather? As she tried to collect her thoughts, the bakery owner offered them both tea, and they sat in silence for a moment, the quiet hum of the storm outside the only sound. She tried not to stare at him, but it was hard not to. There was something magnetic about him, something that felt almost otherworldly. And when their eyes met again, he gave her a look that made her heart race. "Thank you." He finally spoke, his voice rich with something she couldn't place. She nodded, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're welcome. You should rest." The man leaned back, his eyes fluttering closed again, and Julia went back to preparing the bread for delivery. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Who was this man really? And why did he seem so familiar, as if she had known him for a long time, even though she was certain they had never met before? Her mind raced with thoughts, but she pushed them aside for the moment. She had work to do, and he was still a stranger. Little did she know, the stranger she had just helped was no ordinary man, and his presence in her life was about to change everything. Julia couldn't believe her eyes. The man who had appeared to be on the brink of death not long ago was now sitting up in the warmth of the bakery, looking healthier by the minute. His skin, which had been pale and cold, was starting to regain some color. His eyes, once clouded with exhaustion, were now sharp and alert. She had no idea what kind of person she had helped, but she was beginning to feel the weight of something strange and powerful in the air between them. The bakery owner, a friendly but cautious woman named Rose, continued her work in the back, leaving Julia alone with the mysterious man. As he sat there, his intense gaze never left her, and Julia could feel her heartbeat quicken. The storm outside had not let up. It howled against the windows, but inside the bakery, it was warm, almost too warm, as if the air itself was reacting to the stranger's presence. Julia had always been a practical person, focused on the here and now, but today felt different. She found herself thinking about the man, the strange way he looked at her, the odd warmth that seemed to radiate from him. Was he really just a lost traveler as he claimed? Or was there more to him than met the eye? "You're quiet," the man said suddenly, his voice breaking through her thoughts. "Are you all right?" Julia blinked, startled by his words. "I'm fine," she said, though she didn't feel quite fine. The truth was, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something beyond her control. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice sounding steadier than she felt. "Lucian," he replied, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "And you are?" Julia hesitated. "Julia." His eyes seemed to sparkle at the sound of her name, but it was more than just a simple glance. There was a deep recognition in his gaze, one that unsettled her. She shook it off, trying to dismiss the strange feeling rising in her chest. "Thank you for helping me," Lucian continued, his voice calm but oddly firm. "You've done more than you know." Julia frowned. "What do you mean by that?" Lucian leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense, yet still strangely comforting. "You've awakened something in me, something I thought was long gone." Julia's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know whether to be frightened or flattered. "I don't understand," she whispered. "What is it that I awakened?" He paused for a moment, his expression hard to read. "Something that has been dormant for centuries," he said slowly. "I am not who you think I am, Julia." Julia stared at him, unsure how to respond. The silence between them stretched on, and she suddenly felt as though she were standing on the edge of a great unknown. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Lucian stood up, his movements fluid and effortless, as if he hadn't just been on the brink of collapse. He walked over to the window, looking out at the storm. "I am not just a man, Julia. I am a vampire. A king." Julia blinked in disbelief. "What?" she gasped. "A vampire?" Lucian turned to face her, his eyes glowing with an intensity she had never seen before. "Yes," he said, his voice low but powerful. "A king. A ruler of a kingdom far from here. And I've been searching for someone who could awaken the power I've lost." Julia took a step back, her mind racing. She had heard stories of vampires, but she had never believed in them. Not in the way Lucian was describing. This was something entirely different. "You're saying you're immortal?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lucian nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes, I've lived for centuries, Julia. But something changed when I met you. Something I cannot explain." Julia felt a chill run down her spine. "What does this mean?" she whispered, unable to look away from him. Lucian's gaze softened slightly. "It means you've become a part of my world, whether you want to be or not." The words hung in the air between them, thick with the promise of something dark and dangerous. Julia felt her breath catch in her throat. I don't know if I can understand all of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's too much." Lucian stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I don't expect you to understand. But I need you, Julia. I need you to help me. You've already started to, whether you realize it or not." Julia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her world, the simple life she had always known, seemed to be slipping through her fingers. But Lucian was right. She had already started something by helping him, something that was now beyond her control. And as much as she wanted to walk away from this strange new reality, she knew she couldn't. Not now. Not when her heart was already tangled up in his world. "What do you need me to do?" she asked quietly. Lucian smiled, a faint but genuine smile. "Everything, Julia. I need you to stay with me, to help me reclaim what was lost." The words sent a wave of uncertainty crashing through her. But as she looked into his eyes, she realized she had already made her choice. She was already a part of this, whether she wanted to be or not. Julia spent the next few days in a daze, trying to make sense of everything Lucian had told her. Each moment felt surreal, as if she had stepped into a world that didn't quite fit her reality. The bakery, the familiar streets, the weathered coat she wore, everything seemed ordinary, yet nothing felt the same anymore. Lucian had given her the space to think, but it was clear from his quiet presence that he was watching her, waiting for her decision. He was still a mystery, a puzzle she wasn't sure she was ready to solve, but somehow, she couldn't stay away. One evening, As the storm outside finally began to calm, she found herself standing at the bakery door, looking out into the night. The world had changed, and it wasn't just the weather. Lucian had asked her to stay with him, to join his world, and as much as she tried to resist, she knew it was no longer a choice. She couldn't walk away from what had already begun. As if summoned by her thoughts, Lucian appeared at the door, his figure cutting through the dim light like a shadow. His presence was commanding, even without words, and for a moment, Julia felt her heart race. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "You're still thinking it over?" he asked, his voice low but warm. Julia turned to face him, her emotions a whirlwind inside her chest. "How could I not? You're asking me to believe in things I've only heard about in stories. Vampires, kings, curses, none of this is real." Lucian's gaze softened, and he took a step closer. "I know it's hard to understand. It's a world that's hidden from most people, and for good reason. But what you don't know is that you're already part of it. You've awakened something in me, Julia, something I thought was lost forever." Julia shook her head, still trying to make sense of his words. "You keep saying that, but I don't understand what I've done. I just helped you when you were hurt." "You've done more than that," Lucian replied, his tone serious now. "When you touched me, when you cared for me, it triggered something inside me. I've been searching for a way to break a curse that has bound me for centuries. I thought I would never find it. But now I know that the answer was right in front of me." Julia's mind raced. "The curse, what does it have to do with me?" Lucian's eyes were filled with something between hope and uncertainty. "The curse has held me prisoner for centuries, Julia. I am the vampire king, but I cannot rule without breaking free from it. You are the key, whether you realize it or not." He paused, watching her closely. "The moment you touched me, I felt it. The curse began to lift, just a little. You've unlocked something in me, something I can't explain, but I know you're part of this." Julia stepped back, her heart pounding. "I don't want to be part of this. I don't know anything about curses or vampire kings. I'm just a regular person." Lucian sighed, stepping forward and reaching out to her. "You're not just a regular person, Julia. You're special. You've always been special, but you've never known it. That's why the curse chose you. You have a connection to me, to my bloodline, and that connection is what's going to set me free." Julia wanted to protest, to argue that none of this made sense, but she was caught in his gaze, mesmerized by the intensity in his eyes. She could feel it too, that strange pull, that connection between them that she couldn't explain. "I don't know what you're asking me to do," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm asking you to help me break the curse," Lucian said gently. "To stay with me, to help me reclaim what's rightfully mine. Together, we can restore balance. Together, we can bring peace to my kingdom." Julia felt a surge of emotions crash over her. Fear, confusion, and something else she couldn't name. She had never believed in fairy tales, never imagined that something like this could happen to her. But standing there, with Lucian looking at her like he was holding the weight of the world in his eyes, she couldn't deny that everything in her told her this was the beginning of something huge. Something impossible. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucian's lips curved into a small but sincere smile. "Just trust me," he said. "Trust that this is the path you were meant to take. And trust that, together, we will change everything." Julia didn't know what that would mean for her future. She didn't know what kind of world she was about to enter or what dangers lay ahead. But one thing was clear. Her life had already been changed forever, and there was no turning back. With a deep breath, she nodded. "I trust you," she said quietly, knowing that once those words left her lips, there would be no going back. Lucian stepped forward, his hand gently brushing her cheek. "Thank you, Julia," he whispered. "You have no idea how much this means to me." And just like that, Julia was no longer just a simple delivery girl. She was stepping into a world of darkness, power, and ancient magic, where the stakes were higher than anything she had ever imagined. Julia stood in the candlelit room, the soft glow casting shadows that danced across the stone walls. Lucian's words echoed in her mind, each one a heavy weight that seemed to pull her deeper into his world. She had agreed to stay with him, to help him break the curse, but what did that really mean? What was expected of her? Lucian had promised that they would bring peace to his kingdom, but as she looked around the dimly lit room, filled with ancient tapestries and strange symbols, she couldn't help but feel like a small piece in a much larger puzzle. Lucian, however, seemed confident in his path. He had shown her the castle, the dark halls that stretched far beyond the rooms she had seen, the massive library filled with scrolls of forgotten knowledge. She had been introduced to his court, the nobles who had once ruled alongside him, their cold eyes and unreadable expressions making it clear that they weren't thrilled with her presence. But Lucian had stood by her side, and no one dared challenge his authority. As the days passed, Julia grew more accustomed to the strange world she had entered. The castle, though beautiful, felt like a place trapped in time, with its towering spires and winding corridors. Lucian had given her a suite of rooms, luxurious yet isolated, and she spent her days wandering the halls, trying to find her place. Her life was no longer simple, no longer predictable, but in the quiet moments, when she was alone, Julia couldn't help but feel the weight of what she had stepped into. It wasn't just Lucian's kingdom that needed saving, it was him. He had opened up to her in ways he hadn't to anyone else, revealing pieces of his past, his struggles with the curse that had bound him for centuries. He was not just a king. He was a man who had lost everything, a man searching for redemption. One evening, as the moonlight spilled through the windows, Lucian invited her to the balcony. The air was cool, and the storm from days ago had passed, leaving behind a quiet calm. The city below was a sea of lights, but above, the sky was clear, the stars shining brightly. "Do you ever miss it?" Julia asked quietly, her gaze on the stars. "The life you had before all of this." Lucian stood beside her, his posture tall and regal, his eyes distant as if lost in a memory. "I do," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I had a life once, a family, a future, but that was taken from me." He paused, looking at her. "And now I am bound to this curse. I cannot escape it. But with you, I feel like there is hope." Julia turned to him, her heart aching for him in a way she hadn't expected. "What is the curse?" she asked gently. Lucian's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Julia saw the depth of the pain he carried. "It is a curse of eternity," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries. "I was born into power, a ruler of a kingdom hidden from the human world. But with that power came a great sacrifice. I made a deal, a pact, and in doing so, I condemned myself to an eternity of loneliness, bound by the blood that runs through my veins. A bloodline that can never be broken, unless someone with the right power awakens it." Julia's mind raced, trying to comprehend what he was saying. "So you need me to break the curse?" she asked, though she wasn't entirely sure she understood what that would mean. Lucian nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, you are the key, Julia. I don't know how or why, but your presence, your touch, it has already begun to heal the curse. It's more than just a coincidence. I can feel it. But how? How do I do this?" Julia asked, her voice trembling. Lucian took a step closer to her, his expression softening. "I don't know yet. But together, we will figure it out." He reached out, his hand brushing her cheek. "You are already more than you know, Julia. You carry the power within you, even if you don't understand it yet." Julia felt a strange warmth spread through her at his touch, something she couldn't explain. It was as if the world around her shifted, and she suddenly understood what he meant. She had always been ordinary, just a simple delivery girl, never believing in magic or fantasy. But now, standing in this ancient castle with Lucian, a man who claimed to be a vampire king, everything she had known about herself was being tested. She wasn't ordinary. She had power, even if she didn't know how to harness it yet. Lucian continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to trust me, Julia. We are running out of time. There are forces working against us, and if we don't find a way to break the curse soon, everything I've built, everything I've fought for, will crumble." Julia nodded, the gravity of the situation sinking in. She didn't fully understand everything, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't turn back now. She had already stepped into this world, and now, she was a part of it. "I trust you, Lucian," she said softly. He smiled, his eyes softening with a mix of gratitude and something else, something deeper. "Thank you," he whispered. "Together, we will find a way." As they stood on the balcony, the wind blowing softly around them, Julia felt a strange sense of resolve settle within her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, She felt like maybe, just maybe, she was where she was meant to be. Julia awoke the next morning with the weight of everything that had happened weighing heavily on her. Lucian had explained the curse, the power she now unknowingly held, but it all felt like too much to absorb. She had helped him, she had touched him, and something had shifted. But what did that really mean? Was she really the key to breaking centuries-old magic? As she sat up in bed, the cool morning light filtering through the thick curtains, her thoughts kept returning to Lucian, the Vampire King. Her heart had been racing ever since she met him, and every word he spoke only seemed to deepen the mystery. She couldn't deny the strange pull she felt toward him, the way he made her feel like she was more than just a delivery girl, more than just ordinary. But she still couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling of uncertainty that gripped her. How could someone like her, a simple woman with no magic or knowledge of the supernatural, play a part in something so huge? She got out of bed and quickly dressed, pulling on the warm, soft clothes Lucian had given her. As she made her way through the quiet hallways of the castle, she found herself wondering what had become of the life she once knew. Her old life, the simple routine of delivering packages, seemed so distant now. She had stepped into a world filled with vampires, kings, and magic, a world she couldn't have imagined in her wildest dreams. As she reached the grand dining hall, she saw Lucian standing by the tall windows, looking out at the sprawling grounds below. He turned as she entered, and their eyes met. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, something that sent a shiver down her spine. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm but laced with an underlying urgency. "How did you sleep?" Julia hesitated for a moment before answering. "I don't know if I can say I slept," she admitted. "There's so much on my mind." Lucian stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in a way that made Julia's heart race. "I understand. I know this is a lot to take in, but I need you to understand something important. What you did, Julia, it's more significant than you realize. Your touch, your presence, it has already started to break the curse. That's why we don't have much time." Julia felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not even sure how I'm doing anything," she added, her voice shaking. "How can I possibly be the key to all of this?" Lucian looked at her with a softness that surprised her. "It's not about what you can do right now. It's about who you are, what you represent. Your blood, your lineage, it's connected to the very magic that binds this curse. You're more than just a witness to this story, Julia. You are a part of it." Julia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "But I'm just a regular person. How can I have any connection to something like this?" Lucian's eyes darkened, and his expression became serious. "You are not just a regular person, Julia. Your family's history, though hidden from you, has a connection to mine. You carry the bloodline of ancient magic, a magic that can undo what has been done to me." Julia felt her head spin. "But how do I even begin to understand all of this? I've never known anything about magic, or curses, or vampires." Lucian stepped even closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I will teach you. I will show you what you need to know. But you must trust me, Julia. Trust that this is not just a fantasy. This is real, and we have a limited time to act." Julia took a step back, her thoughts racing. What if I can't do it? What if I'm not strong enough? Lucian's face softened, and he reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "You are stronger than you think. You've already done the impossible by awakening the magic within me. Don't doubt yourself now." His words were like a balm to her soul, soothing the uncertainty that had been gnawing at her. She met his gaze, the uncertainty still there, but something else beginning to stir, a strange sense of determination, of purpose. "What do we do next?" she asked, her voice steady now. Lucian smiled, a look of relief flashing across his face. "Now, we begin the real work. Together." He turned, motioning for her to follow him as he walked toward a large wooden door at the far end of the room. "This is where the magic begins," he said, as he opened the door to reveal a dark, quiet chamber. Inside were shelves lined with ancient books, scrolls, and artifacts. It looked like a library, but not one Julia had ever seen before. The air in the room was thick with the weight of history, of untold secrets waiting to be uncovered. "These are the texts that hold the knowledge we need," Lucian said, walking toward one of the shelves and pulling down a large, dusty book. "This is where we find the answers. The key to breaking the curse." Julia stepped closer, her curiosity piqued. And what do I need to do? Lucian looked at her, his eyes dark with intensity. You need to learn, Julia. The magic is already inside you. Now, we just need to unlock it. The weight of his words settled over her. The world she had once known seemed so far away now. But here, with Lucian, she knew there was no turning back. She had already stepped into the unknown. And whatever came next, she would face it with him by her side. Julia sat at the ancient wooden table, the heavy tome spread before her. The castle library was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of pages as Lucian flipped through the dusty books, his brow furrowed in concentration. She had spent the last few days studying, trying to understand the magic that had been awakened within her. But the more she learned, the more questions she had. Lucian had explained the curse in greater detail, showing her ancient texts and symbols that seemed to hold the key to everything. Still, it was difficult to grasp the full weight of what she had gotten herself into. Her life had been so simple before, delivery runs, grocery shopping, quiet evenings alone. Now, everything felt like it was shifting beneath her feet. But Lucian was patient, teaching her everything he knew, guiding her through the strange and ancient magic that flowed through her veins. You're doing well, he said one evening, his voice deep and reassuring as he watched her carefully practice a spell from one of the texts. Julia looked up, her hands still trembling slightly from the unfamiliar power she was attempting to harness. I don't feel like I'm doing well, she admitted. It's like everything is just out of reach. I can feel the magic inside me, but I can't control it. Lucian walked over to her, his footsteps soundless on the cold stone floor. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and she looked up at him, meeting his eyes. That's because you're trying to force it, he said, his tone gentle but firm. The magic isn't something you can control with your mind. It's about trust. You have to trust the magic within you, let it flow naturally. Julia frowned, feeling the weight of his words. She had been trying so hard, so desperately, to make sense of everything, to prove that she was capable of helping him break the curse. But the more she tried, the more frustrated she became. I don't know how to trust it, she murmured. I don't even know if I trust myself. Lucian's eyes softened with understanding. You will, he said. It takes time. You've only just begun to tap into this power. Give it time, and you'll learn to trust yourself, to trust that the magic will guide you. Julia took a deep breath, trying to calm the swirling thoughts in her mind. She knew he was right, but the weight of the responsibility was suffocating. Everything depended on her. The curse, Lucian's kingdom, his very existence, all of it was now tied to her. But how could she possibly be the one to break a curse that had lasted for centuries? Lucian, sensing her hesitation, smiled faintly. We don't have to do this alone, he said. We're in this together. His words brought her a strange sense of comfort, but they also stirred something else inside her, an unfamiliar feeling that she couldn't name. She looked at him, her heart beating faster than before. Together, she repeated quietly. She wasn't sure what that meant for her future, or for Lucian, but in that moment, it felt like the right thing to say. Yes, Lucian said, his voice barely above a whisper. Together, the next few days passed in a blur of lessons, magical practices, and more questions than answers. Julia could feel the magic growing stronger inside her, a steady pulse that beat in time with her own heart. Yet, with each step forward, the uncertainty grew. She had never been part of something so vast, so important. She was just a simple woman, thrust into a world she barely understood. Lucian had explained that the curse that bound him was not just a physical curse. It was a curse of the soul, a bond that could only be broken by someone with the right bloodline. And that bloodline, he had told her, ran through her veins. Julia had tried to push that thought aside. It was too much to comprehend, too much to accept. She wasn't special. She wasn't anything important. But Lucian had insisted. You are the key, he said again and again. You always have been. As the days turned into weeks, Julia found herself becoming more and more entwined in this strange, magical world. She was no longer just a visitor in the castle. She was a part of it now. She walked the halls with more confidence, spoke with the other members of Lucian's court, and even began to learn the history of the vampire kingdom he ruled. But as much as she learned, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. A challenge, a test that would require more than just magic. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the tall towers of the castle, Lucian called her to the training room. "It's time," he said, his voice grave. "Time for you to face what's coming." Julia's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Lucian's gaze was hard, his eyes filled with the knowledge of centuries. "There are forces at work, Julia. Forces that do not want the curse to be broken. We will be tested, and you will have to decide if you are ready for what comes next." Julia swallowed, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a heavy cloak. She had known it was coming. The moment she had agreed to help him, she had known there would be a price. But she wasn't prepared for the reality of it. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lucian stepped forward, placing a hand on her arm. "You can," he said. "I believe in you." His words, so simple yet so powerful, were enough to ignite something deep inside her. She wasn't alone. She couldn't walk away now, not when so many lives depended on her. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. Lucian nodded, a proud smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Then we begin." And with those words, Julia knew that everything had changed. There was no turning back now. She was committed to this fight, committed to breaking the curse and saving Lucian, even if it meant facing the greatest challenge of her life. Julia stood at the entrance of the grand hall, her heart pounding in her chest as Lucian's words echoed in her mind. "We will be tested." The weight of those words was like a heavy stone, pressing down on her every step. She had come this far, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead filled her with both fear and determination. Lucian had been preparing her for weeks, teaching her how to harness the magic within her, how to tap into the power she had always been unaware of. But no amount of training could prepare her for what was coming next. The dark, stone walls of the castle seemed to close in around her as she walked down the corridor toward the training room. Lucian was waiting for her, his figure tall and imposing as always, but there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. The air around him was thick with anticipation. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady, yet with a hint of urgency. Julia nodded, though she wasn't sure if she could truly say she was ready. "I'll be ready. What are we facing?" Lucian's expression grew serious, and he took a step closer to her. "A trial. The forces working against us are not going to let us break the curse without a fight. There are those who will do everything in their power to stop us." Julia felt a chill run down her spine at his words. "What kind of fight?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The kind that will test everything we've worked for," Lucian replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. "This isn't just about magic. This is about loyalty, trust, and the strength of our bond. They will try to break us apart, to weaken our resolve." Julia swallowed hard. She had known there would be dangers, but she hadn't expected this kind of challenge. She had already been pushed to her limits, and now, facing something even darker, she didn't know if she could hold her ground. Lucian seemed to sense her fear, and he stepped closer, his hand resting gently on her arm. "I won't let them take you," he said softly. "We are in this together. I will protect you, Julia." His words, though comforting, only intensified the storm of emotions inside her. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what was about to happen, but there was no turning back now. "I trust you," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Lucian gave her a faint smile, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite read. "Then trust yourself. You've come this far. You're stronger than you think." The two of them stood there for a moment, the weight of the situation settling around them. Julia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. She had already stepped into the unknown, and there was no going back. Lucian led her into the training room, a vast space with high ceilings and stone floors. In the center, there was a large, circular symbol etched into the ground, glowing with faint, mystical light. Julia had seen this symbol before. Lucian had shown her the ancient runes that represented the binding magic of the curse. This was where it would all happen. Lucian turned to face her, his expression serious. "When the trial begins, you must stay focused. The magic will try to confuse you, to make you doubt yourself. But you cannot falter. Do you understand?" Julia nodded, though her heart was still racing. "I understand." She could feel the magic in the air, heavy and thick, swirling around her like a living thing. Lucian stepped back, his eyes never leaving her as he raised his hands. The room seemed to pulse with energy as the glow from the symbol intensified. "The trial begins now," Lucian said. The words were barely out of his mouth before the air shifted, the temperature dropping dramatically. Shadows twisted and writhed around them, and Julia felt an eerie sensation crawl up her spine. She instinctively stepped closer to Lucian, her heart pounding. Suddenly, the shadows seemed to come to life, swirling and taking shape in front of them. Dark figures emerged, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They were not human. She could feel it in the air. They were beings of pure darkness, drawn from the deepest corners of the curse. "What are they?" Julia whispered, her voice trembling. "They are the manifestation of the curse," Lucian replied, his voice calm despite the danger surrounding them. "They are sent to test us, to weaken our bond. You must face them, Julia. You must prove you have the strength to break the curse." Julia stepped back, her mind racing. She had no idea how to fight these creatures, how to protect herself. She wasn't a fighter, and she certainly wasn't trained for this. But as the dark figures moved closer, she felt the magic inside her stir, as if it was waking up, responding to the threat. She reached out instinctively, her hand glowing with the faint light of the magic she had learned to summon. The shadow figures recoiled, but they did not retreat. They advanced faster, their movements unnatural and fluid, closing in on her. "Focus," Lucian shouted. "Feel the magic within you. Let it guide you." Julia closed her eyes, trying to push aside her fear. She reached deep inside herself, searching for the power that Lucian had taught her to harness. She could feel it, a deep, pulsing energy that seemed to course through her veins. Slowly, she raised her hand, and the magic responded, flowing from her like a current. The figures hesitated, their dark eyes narrowing, but Julia didn't stop. She focused, channeling the power she had awakened, pushing the darkness back. The light from her hand grew brighter, and with a sudden surge, the shadow creatures shrieked and dissipated into the air. The room fell silent. Julia stood there, breathless, her hand still glowing faintly. She had done it. She had fought back. Lucian approached her slowly, his expression unreadable. "You did it," he said quietly, his voice filled with something that sounded like pride. Julia looked at him, her chest still heaving from the fight. "I did it," she whispered, disbelief in her voice. Lucian nodded. "You're ready," he said, his voice firm. "We're ready." The trial was over, but Julia knew this was just the beginning. She had faced the darkness, and she had won. But there was still so much more to do. The curse had not been broken, and their journey was far from over. But for the first time, Julia felt like she had a chance. A chance to break the curse, to save Lucian, and to change their fate. She was no longer just a simple woman in a strange world. She was a part of something much bigger, and now, she had the power to see it through. Together, they would face whatever came next. Julia's heart was still pounding from the trial. The room where she had faced the shadowy figures was now silent, the lingering tension thick in the air. She had done it. She had fought back, and the creatures that represented the curse had been pushed away, but the victory felt hollow. There was still so much left to do. Lucian stood next to her, his gaze locked on the now empty space where the dark figures had once been. He was silent for a moment before he turned to her, his face unreadable. "You've shown your strength," he said, his voice low but filled with respect. "But this is only one battle in a war that's been raging for centuries." Julia looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had pushed the darkness back, but she hadn't broken the curse. Not yet. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lucian's expression softened as he reached out, gently touching her arm. "Now we go deeper," he said. "The trial was only the beginning. The curse is ancient, and it's tied to the very foundation of my kingdom. To break it, we must confront the source, the heart of the magic that holds it in place." Julia nodded slowly, trying to digest everything he was saying. "And what is that heart?" she asked. Lucian looked away for a moment, his eyes darkening. "The heart is a powerful artifact, a source of ancient magic that was used to bind me and my kingdom. It's hidden in the heart of the forest, deep within the lands that were once mine to rule. To reach it, we must face the trials of the forest and the guardians who protect it." Julia felt a shiver run down her spine at the mention of guardians. Guardians? What kind of guardians? Lucian's gaze turned cold, his jaw tightening. "They are the protectors of the heart, creatures of pure magic. bound to guard the artifact for all eternity. They will stop at nothing to prevent anyone from reaching it. Even me. Julia's pulse quickened at his words. And how do we get past them? Lucian turned back to her, his expression hardening. We don't fight them head-on. The Guardians are too powerful. We must use our wits, our magic. We must be clever, or we'll never make it. Julia nodded, the uncertainty in her chest growing. She had never been a fighter, and the thought of facing powerful magical creatures filled her with fear. But she had come this far. She couldn't back down now. When do we leave? She asked, her voice steady despite the nerves that twisted inside her. Lucian gave her a faint smile. We leave tomorrow, he said. We have no time to waste. The longer we wait, the more power the curse gains. The next day, Julia found herself standing at the edge of the forest, the trees towering over her like ancient sentinels. The air was thick with mist, and a strange, otherworldly silence hung in the air. Lucian stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Stay close, he said, his voice low. The forest is alive with magic. The Guardians will be watching. Julia's heart raced as they stepped into the shadows of the trees. The forest felt different, as if it were watching them, waiting for their next move. Every sound seemed amplified, the rustle of the leaves, the distant calls of unseen creatures. They walked in silence, the path ahead uncertain and treacherous. After what felt like hours, they came to a clearing. At the center stood a massive stone structure, ancient and weathered, its surface covered in intricate runes. Julia could feel the magic emanating from it, powerful and dangerous. This is it, Lucian said, his voice tight. The heart of the curse. They stepped forward, but as they did, a low growl echoed through the clearing. Julia froze, her breath caught in her throat. From the shadows of the trees, figures began to emerge, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The Guardians. Tall, lithe creatures with skin as dark as the night, their eyes gleaming like stars. They moved with a fluid grace, circling around them, their movements silent and deliberate. What do we do now? Julia whispered, her fear rising. Lucian's expression was calm, but Julia could see the tension in his posture. We must pass the trial of the Guardians, he said. We must prove that we are worthy to approach the heart. Only then will they allow us to continue. Julia's mind raced. How could she prove herself worthy? She wasn't a warrior. She didn't have the magic Lucian had. But she couldn't back down. Not now. What is the trial? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Lucian turned to face her, his eyes filled with determination. The trial is different for each person, he said. For you, it will test your heart, your strength, and your resolve. You must face your greatest fear, and you must overcome it. The word struck Julia like a blow to the chest. Her greatest fear? What could that possibly be? She had faced so much already. But Lucian was right. The Guardians wouldn't let them pass without a fight. I'm ready, she said, though she wasn't sure if she was lying to herself. The Guardians stepped closer, their eyes fixed on her. The air around her seemed to hum with energy, the pressure building in her chest. She closed her eyes, trying to focus, trying to steady her breathing. Suddenly, she was no longer in the clearing. She was somewhere else entirely, standing in front of a door that led into the darkness of her own mind. The door opened, and she stepped through, her heart racing. Inside, she was confronted with memories she had long buried. Her childhood, her past, her fears, each one came to life before her eyes. She saw the faces of those she had lost, the pain of their absence. She saw herself, weak, alone, unsure. A voice echoed in the darkness. You are not enough, it said. You will never be enough. The words cut through her like a knife, but she stood firm. I am enough, she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. I am enough. The vision began to fade, the darkness receding. She had faced her fear and conquered it. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the clearing, the Guardians standing before her, silent and still. Lucian was by her side, his eyes filled with pride. You did it, he said softly. You passed the trial. Julia's heart swelled with relief and exhaustion. She had done it. But this was only the beginning. The heart of the curse was still ahead of them, and the journey was far from over. Julia's pulse raced as she stepped away from the Guardians, the weight of the trial still pressing down on her shoulders. Lucian stood by her side, his presence steady and reassuring, yet the air around them was thick with tension. The guardians, after watching her face her greatest fear and overcome it, had stepped aside, allowing them to pass. But Julia knew this was just the beginning. The heart of the curse, the artifact that held the power to break Lucian's chains, was still ahead of them. The forest had grown darker, the trees towering over them like silent sentinels, their twisted branches reaching toward the sky. It felt as if the very earth beneath their feet was alive with ancient magic, vibrating with a power that made the hairs on the back of Julia's neck stand on end. Lucian turned to her, his eyes burning with a mixture of pride and something else, something darker. "You did well," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "But the real test is still ahead. We must be prepared." Julia nodded, her mind still reeling from the vision she had faced. She had seen things she'd buried deep within her, fears she thought she had left behind long ago. And now, standing here in the heart of this ancient, mystical forest, she realized how much of her own strength she had yet to discover. "I'm ready," she said, though the uncertainty lingered in her voice. Lucian gave her a small, encouraging smile before turning back toward the path ahead. "Follow me," he instructed, and they continued their journey. They walked for what felt like hours, the silence only broken by the distant calls of unseen creatures and the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. The further they ventured into the forest, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees seemed to close in around them, and Julia felt as if the very air was charged with an electric energy that made it hard to breathe. Finally, they reached a clearing, and there, standing in the center, was an ancient stone altar, weathered by time and covered in moss. A faint, otherworldly glow radiated from it, casting eerie shadows across the ground. Julia's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the heart of the curse. Lucian stopped in front of the altar, his face a mask of determination. "This is where the artifact is hidden," he said quietly, his gaze never leaving the stone structure. "But it's not just a simple object. It's guarded by powerful magic, magic that has bound me for centuries. We will need all our strength to reach it." Julia's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer. The magic in the air was palpable, a swirling force that seemed to press in on her from all sides. "What do we have to do?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Lucian turned to her, his eyes fierce. "We must each place our hand on the stone," he said. "Together, only by combining our magic can we break the barrier that guards the artifact." Julia nodded, steeling herself for whatever was about to happen. She had already faced her fear. She had already fought back the darkness. Now, she would face whatever else this cursed forest had in store for her. She stepped forward, placing her hand on the cold stone. Lucian did the same, his hand brushing against hers. The moment their hands made contact, a shockwave of power shot through her, sending a jolt of energy that made her knees tremble. She gasped, struggling to steady herself as the ground beneath them began to tremble. The stone altar glowed brighter, its power building, and suddenly, a blast of energy surged from the altar, knocking both of them back. Julia cried out as she fell to the ground, but Lucian was quick to catch her, his grip firm. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice strained. Together, they tried to maintain their connection to the stone, but the magic was pushing back harder than ever. The energy in the air was overwhelming, and Julia could feel her magic surging inside her, twisting and pulsing like a living thing. It was as if the very force of the curse itself was fighting them, trying to keep them from reaching the artifact. "We can't stop now," Lucian yelled, his voice filled with urgency. "You have to focus. Trust the magic." Julia's heart pounded as she fought to steady her breath. She had to trust him. She had to trust herself. With a surge of willpower, she pushed past the fear, allowing the magic to flow freely through her. The moment she did, a blinding light erupted from the altar, and she felt the power of the curse begin to shift. Slowly, the glow from the stone began to fade, and the oppressive weight that had been bearing down on them lifted. For a moment, all Julia could hear was the rush of blood in her ears, the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her chest. And then, as the light faded completely, she realized the magic was gone. The stone was silent. The curse was no longer pressing in on her. They had done it. Julia took a shaky breath, her body exhausted from the effort, but there was a sense of relief flooding her chest. They had broken through the barrier. They were closer than ever to breaking the curse for good. Lucian stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the altar. "We've done it," he said softly, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "But this is only the first step. We have the artifact now. Now we must use it to break the curse completely." Julia nodded, feeling a surge of determination wash over her. They were closer than ever to achieving their goal. Together, they could do this. They could break the curse. And with it, they could change the fate of Lucian's kingdom forever. The artifact was now in their hands, but the journey was far from over. Julia and Lucian stood before the stone altar, the power of the curse lifting, but it was only a momentary relief. They had fought through the forest, faced the guardians, and broken the first barrier, but the heart of the curse still lay ahead. The path was more uncertain than ever, and the weight of their next steps pressed on Julia's chest. Lucian had said they were close, but now, with the artifact in hand, doubt began to creep in. What would they have to do next? "We're not done yet," Lucian said, breaking the silence, his voice steady, though Julia could see the fatigue in his eyes. "This is only the beginning. The real work starts now." Julia nodded, still processing everything that had happened. Her hand tightened around the artifact, feeling the cool, ancient stone beneath her fingers. The magic inside her stirred once more, responding to the object in a way she hadn't expected. It pulsed with a strange energy, and she could feel it, deep inside her, syncing with her own power. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper, but the question hung heavy in the air. Lucian's gaze met hers, his expression intense. "Now we use it," he said. "The artifact is the key to breaking the curse. We need to reach the source, the core of the curse, and destroy it. Only then will I be free." Julia's heart raced at his words. Destroy it. Could they really do that? Could she really help Lucian break something that had bound him for centuries? "How do we find the source?" she asked, her voice steady despite the doubt in her heart. Lucian looked toward the distance, his eyes narrowing as if he were focusing on something only he could see. "The source lies in the deepest part of my kingdom, buried beneath the old castle ruins. The curse was born there, and it's where it must end." Julia's stomach churned at the thought. The castle ruins. The place where it all began. They would have to go there. "But the path is treacherous," Lucian continued, his voice darkening. "The magic that keeps the curse alive still lingers there, and the further we go, the stronger it becomes." Julia's grip tightened on the artifact. She could feel the weight of Lucian's words, the weight of the magic inside her, but she wasn't ready to back down. She had already come this far. She couldn't let fear stop her now. "We've come this far," she said, her voice firm, though her heart raced with uncertainty. "We can do this." Lucian turned to face her, his eyes softening with a mixture of pride and something else she couldn't quite place. "I never doubted you," he said, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. "But we must stay focused. The final trial will not be easy." Julia nodded, taking a deep breath. She could feel the magic inside her, surging, ready. She had to trust herself, trust that she could do this. The road ahead was unknown, but it was one they would walk together. Lucian led the way, the path to the ruins taking them deeper into the heart of the forest. The trees became thicker, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers reaching for the sky. The air grew colder, the magic more oppressive, but Julia's determination only grew stronger. As they neared the ruins, the landscape changed. The trees began to thin, and in the distance, Julia could see the remains of the castle, its stone walls crumbling, covered in ivy. The cursed heart of Lucian's kingdom. They had reached their destination. "This is it," Lucian said, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with awe and fear. "The source of the curse. The final trial." Julia took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The ruins loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She was ready. Together, they stepped into the ruins, the magic inside her thrumming, responding to the energy that still pulsed through the stone walls. The curse was alive here, and the closer they got, the stronger the pull became. The air felt heavy, like they were walking into the very heart of the darkness that had bound Lucian for so long. "We need to reach the altar," Lucian said, his voice tense. "It's the only way to destroy the curse." They moved quickly, the ruins stretching out before them, filled with ancient relics and forgotten symbols. The magic in the air thickened, and Julia could feel the pressure mounting. She glanced at Lucian, who was now walking ahead of her with purpose, his eyes fixed on the altar that stood at the center of the ruined hall. They were so close. The final trial was ahead of them, but Julia didn't feel afraid anymore. She felt determined. They reached the altar, the ancient stone covered in moss and vines. Lucian stood before it, his hands trembling as he placed the artifact on the stone surface. "This is where it ends," he said, his voice steady. Julia stepped closer, her hand reaching out toward the artifact, feeling the magic swell in the air around them. It was time. The final battle. The final test. The curse had bound Lucian for centuries. But now, together, they would destroy it. As the artifact connected with the altar, the air seemed to crackle with energy. The magic surged, and a blinding light exploded from the stone, engulfing them both in its brilliance. Julia closed her eyes, feeling the raw power of the curse being ripped apart. She could feel the magic inside her, swirling, twisting, pulling at the very fabric of the curse. And then, in an instant, it was gone. The light faded, and the silence was deafening. Julia opened her eyes, her heart racing. The magic was gone. The curse was broken. Lucian stood beside her, his face alight with something she hadn't seen before, hope. The chains that had bound him for centuries were no more. They had done it. Together. The kingdom was free. Lucian turned to her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Julia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. The journey had been long, the trials countless, but they had succeeded. They had broken the curse, and now, they had a future, together. The castle had been silent for hours, the kind of silence that comes after a battle, the kind that follows a victory so profound it leaves a person breathless. The curse that had bound Lucian for centuries was gone, lifted by their combined strength and the power of the artifact. The magic that had once seeped into every corner of his kingdom, corrupting it, was now fading into nothingness. Julia stood in the heart of the ruined castle, her mind still reeling from what had just happened. She had never imagined her life would lead her to this point, standing beside a vampire king in a broken castle, having just shattered a curse that had bound him for centuries. She turned to Lucian, whose dark eyes were filled with something she hadn't seen before: relief, gratitude, and, most surprising of all, peace. He was free, truly free. For the first time in centuries, he was no longer shackled by the curse that had defined his existence. Lucian reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "It's over," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it. I'm free." Julia looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had known the journey would be difficult, but nothing had prepared her for the depth of the power they had just unleashed. "What now?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart was still racing from the intensity of the moment. Lucian smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. "Now we rebuild. We restore what was lost. Together." The words hung in the air between them, like a promise, and Julia realized with a start that she had no doubts about what the future held. The bond they shared, forged in the fires of their shared struggle, was stronger than anything she had ever known. Lucian squeezed her hand, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've changed everything," he said quietly. "Not just for me, but for my kingdom. You've given us hope." Julia felt her chest swell with pride at his words, but also something deeper, something that had grown within her over the course of their journey. The magic inside her, the strength she had discovered, wasn't just tied to Lucian or the curse. It was a part of who she was now. "We did this together," she replied, her voice firm, unwavering. "I couldn't have done it without you." Lucian's expression softened, and for the first time, she saw the full weight of the centuries he had lived. "I never thought I would find someone who could stand by me, someone who could break the curse and free me. I thought I would spend eternity alone, bound by this magic." He paused, his gaze distant for a moment before he focused on her again. "But then I found you." Julia's heart skipped a beat at his words, and she felt the connection between them deepen in a way she couldn't fully explain. It wasn't just magic, it was something more, something real. She smiled softly, her heart full. "I'm glad you found me," she said quietly, her voice full of meaning. The two of them stood there for a moment, the weight of the world shifting in their hands, the future suddenly full of possibilities. "We have a lot of work ahead of us," Lucian said, breaking the silence, his voice calm and determined once more. "My kingdom is in ruins, and there are many who will try to claim power now that the curse is broken. We must rebuild and protect what we have won." Julia nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then let's rebuild," she said, her voice firm. "Together." Lucian smiled, a look of pride on his face. "Together," he repeated, and with those words, they turned toward the future. The castle ruins, once a symbol of a dark and cursed past, now stood as a symbol of hope, of a new beginning. They would face whatever came next, side by side, knowing that their strength was no longer just in magic, but in each other. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was one they would walk together. For the first time in centuries, Lucian wasn't alone, and neither was she. The days that followed were a whirlwind of change and restoration. Lucian and Julia, now united in their victory over the curse, worked tirelessly together to rebuild the kingdom. The castle, once a place of dark magic and oppression, was now a symbol of hope and renewal. The walls, though worn and weathered, began to take on new life as they were repaired, and the once crumbling halls were filled with the sound of laughter and determination. Yet, even as they worked to restore what had been lost, Julia could not shake the weight of the future that lay ahead. Despite breaking the curse, there were still those who wanted to seize power, who would try to undermine everything they had fought for. The political unrest was palpable, and the shadows of the past had not fully receded. The work was far from over. One evening, as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Lucian took Julia aside, his expression serious. "We need to confront the ones who will try to take advantage of the power vacuum left by the curse's destruction," he said, his voice low. "There are factions within my kingdom who will not accept our rule, no matter how much we've done to restore order. They will challenge us, test our strength." Julia felt a chill run down her spine. She had known this was coming, but the reality of it hit her harder than she had expected. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. Lucian's eyes burned with determination. "We prepare for the challenges ahead. We have allies, but we need to secure more support. There are people in this kingdom who believe in us, in the new world we are creating. But we need to be strategic, Julia. We need to be smarter than our enemies." He paused, turning to face her fully. "I need you by my side, now more than ever." Julia nodded, the weight of the responsibility settling over her like a cloak. "I'm with you," she said firmly. "We'll face whatever comes together." Over the next few weeks, they set their plans into motion. Lucian worked to strengthen his alliances, reaching out to the various factions that still held power within the kingdom. Some welcomed the changes, eager to move beyond the shadow of the curse, while others remained wary, reluctant to trust a ruler who had once been bound by dark magic. Julia, in the meantime, began to take on a more active role. She had come to understand the intricacies of the kingdom's politics and its people, and she used that knowledge to help Lucian navigate the delicate negotiations with the nobles. Her magic, too, had grown stronger. She had learned to harness it more effectively, and Lucian had taught her how to use it strategically, not just for defense, but for healing and creation as well. She had become more than just a companion to Lucian. She had become an equal partner, someone who could stand beside him and face the future with strength. But despite their progress, there were whispers in the shadows. A faction of powerful nobles who had long schemed against Lucian's rule were starting to gather. They were not pleased with the changes Lucian and Julia had brought, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim the power they had lost. One evening, as Julia and Lucian were walking through the castle gardens, Lucian's mood shifted. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, as if a storm was approaching. "I have to go," he said suddenly, his voice tense. "There's a meeting with the council tomorrow, and I need to be there. You should stay here." Julia looked up at him, concern etched on her face. "What do you mean, you have to go? What's happening?" Lucian paused, his gaze distant, and Julia could feel the weight of his thoughts. "There are still those who want to challenge us," he said slowly. "Tomorrow, the council will decide whether to accept our rule or not. If they refuse—" He trailed off, the implication clear. Julia's heart sank. She had known that there would be opposition, But this was different. This was the moment when everything they had worked for could either crumble or solidify. "We can't let them tear everything down," she said, her voice firm with resolve. Lucian turned to her, his eyes locking onto hers. "We won't. But we need to be careful. We need to outmaneuver them, not just fight them head-on. We can't afford to lose." Julia felt the weight of his words settle over her. She had always been a fighter in her own way, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle of magic. It was a battle of minds, of influence, of power. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with determination. Lucian reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and comforting. "You've already done more than enough. But tomorrow, I need you by my side. We'll face this together." Julia nodded, her heart swelling with pride. She wasn't just a passive observer in this new world. She was an active participant. She was a part of Lucian's world, a world that was still full of uncertainty, but also full of possibility. As the night drew on, the stars overhead seemed to shine brighter, as if reflecting the hope that had begun to grow within her. The road ahead was still filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, Julia felt ready to face whatever came next. With Lucian by her side, they would fight for the kingdom, for the future they were building, and for the life they had worked so hard to create. Together, they could overcome anything. The council meeting was held in the heart of the castle, in the grand hall where decisions that shaped the kingdom were made. Julia and Lucian stood side by side, the weight of the moment pressing on them both. The nobles were gathered around the long table, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. The air in the room was thick with tension. Lucian had prepared for this moment, and Julia could feel his determination, but she could also sense the unease in his posture. They had fought to free his kingdom from the curse, but the true test of their strength was now. Lucian was no longer bound by dark magic, but the world around him had not fully accepted the changes. Some still saw him as the vampire king who had been a prisoner of the curse for centuries. And some, like the older council members, would never let go of the power they had once held. Julia stood beside him, her heart steady but her mind racing. She had learned so much over the past months, not just about magic, but about the intricacies of leadership, of what it took to unite a kingdom. She wasn't just Lucian's partner in this battle. She was his equal, his co-ruler, his strength. Lucian spoke first, his voice strong and commanding, cutting through the tension in the room. "The curse that bound me for centuries is no more," he said. "And with it, the shadows that plagued this kingdom are gone. But our work has only just begun. We must unite, build a future that's free of fear, free of the divisions that have held us captive." The council members exchanged glances, whispers filling the air. Some were still skeptical, their gazes lingering on Julia as if trying to figure out her place in all of this. "You speak of unity." One of the councilmen, an older vampire, spoke up, his voice thick with suspicion. "But what of those who opposed you? What of the old ways, the traditions that have held this kingdom together for centuries?" Lucian met the councilman's gaze without hesitation. "The old ways have bound us to a past that no longer serves us," he said. "We cannot rebuild by clinging to fear. We must build a future where all are welcome, where strength is measured not by lineage or magic, but by our ability to work together." Julia could feel the weight of the moment as the council members murmured among themselves. There was no turning back now. She could see Lucian's resolve, but she knew this was about more than just him. This was about the kingdom, the people, and the future they were fighting to create. The room grew silent as Lucian continued. "I know the road ahead will be difficult," he said. "There are those who will resist, but we will face them together as one. The future is not set in stone. We can shape it with our actions, with our choices." Julia stepped forward, her voice strong and clear as she addressed the council. "I stand with Lucian," she said, her eyes meeting each of the council members. "I believe in the future we can create. A future where magic, strength, and unity come together, where every voice is heard, where no one is left behind." The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then, one by one, the council members began to speak, their voices hesitant at first, but growing more certain as they saw the strength in Lucian and Julia. It wasn't an immediate victory. There was still resistance, still those who clung to the old ways, but the tide had begun to turn. The council, for the first time in years, was beginning to see the possibility of a new path. And as the meeting came to a close, Lucian turned to Julia, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something unspoken. "We've taken the first step," he said, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. "But there's still work to be done." Julia nodded, her heart filled with determination. "We'll face it together," she said, and in that moment, she knew it was true. Together, they could rebuild the kingdom. Together, they could change the world. As they left the council chamber, the weight of the future seemed lighter. There were challenges ahead, but for the first time, Julia felt that anything was possible. She wasn't just Lucian's partner. She was a ruler in her own right, with the power to shape the future. And as they walked through the halls of the castle, side by side, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it as one, stronger, united, and ready to lead the kingdom into a new era.